For those of you who don't know, I worked for many years in the voluntary sector in Sheffield, and social enterprises are not new to me. I set some up in the community, so we had a community cafe that was established, a women's gym that was established and is still operating today on a not-for-profit basis, but the income is regenerated back into communities. So I've met with Terry, had some brilliant conversations in terms of, the work that I can do to try and support social enterprises, but also see how we can try and reconfigure the way in which people think about social enterprises as well, more widely. So first of all, thank you for inviting me to the conference today. I'm sorry I couldn't be here for more of the conference, to hear more about what the discussions were about, and also to hear directly from yourselves. I understand the theme is about building the conditions for change and social enterprise being in a time of transition. And I think the perspectives that I wanted to offer was more through a social justice lens, because that's the background that I come from, and how we can have that wider conversation about how we connect communities in Sheffield with a bigger picture across the country in terms of where we are and how people perceive enterprises. And I think, as we look at things, the sort of the bigger picture, I think transition is happening. And it brings, I think, more opportunities to help shape our communities as well. Shape our communities in a more positive way. The more grassroots our enterprises are, the more effective they are in having a direct impact in communities. So the question is, how can we make sure that change benefits everyone? And one of the key themes that I've always said coming into politics, because it's the thing that brought me into politics, was making sure that communities go with us on that journey. Going back to what I said right at the start, it was changes that were happening in my community, cuts in services, services shrinking, that made me think, right, well, I've got to do something about this. And that then led to the next step. And it's a similar thing with social enterprises. Who has the idea about, well, what benefits communities? How do we make sure that they are the ones that are going to benefit from this particular idea? Rather than it being, well, this is a wonderful idea, and I think this will benefit communities. So there's got to be a different approach to how we think about who benefits from enterprises or services in general, and how do we make sure that they're involved in the design, in the way forward, because that's where they'll be more sustainable, and they will last a lot longer as well within communities when there is that buy-in there. So as I said, I've had the experience, I've worked, I understand how difficult it is, especially in terms of fundraising. So I started off volunteering, eventually became the chief executive of an organisation, and was responsible for generating income for the various services that we were offering, and recognise, one of the key issues is how short-term funding can have an impact on a lot of the services that we have, where longer-term funding is essential for sustainability, not just for sustainability, for planning as well, to allow us to plan more effectively and to give more security to those services as well. So in Sheffield, I know that social enterprises are a vital part of our infrastructure. Probably not as loud as it needs to be in terms of, this is what services are offering in terms of the wider picture. But no surprise to me, because I think, the sector, very similar to the third sector, I don't like that word, the third sector, but that's how it's defined, is very much seen as the other in terms of what can be done in terms of delivery. So there is still more that needs to be done in terms of raising awareness about the importance of social enterprises, but the fabric, how embedded they are in the fabric of our city. So I think to support meaningful change, just put this pen down, what meaningful change, there are a few things that I think we can look at in terms of opportunities and things that I think I might be able to help with going forward, just in terms of wider discussions. So I think the first one is how do we have affordable services, but decisions, as I said earlier, that are shaped by people most affected. And different communities, different places will have different strengths, and I think we need to play to that as well. and we need to make sure that the policies also reflect those realities that actually do make a difference. So, you know, communities in Arborthorne will have very different needs to communities in Firth Park, and I think it's just recognising the varying needs and making sure that services change based on this. And this requires good jobs as well, and good jobs, reasonable, high-paid, you know, aspirational jobs. You know, we've got to be looking at this for our sector as well, and not just operating on a shoestring, where people often think, well, where's the next bit of money going to come from that will keep us going? That does require more lobbying nationally with MPs on, you know, contract terms, on making sure that where there are government contracts, where there are local authority contracts, we're doing better in terms of, you know, the types of contracts that are on offer. And I know that from next year, the council will be getting longer-term contracts devolved from government, which is good news. And this hopefully will start to have an impact on all of the other services that rely on contracts from the local authority as well. So hopefully there will be a transition from 1 to 2 and 3 year projects. You know, ideally I would say 5 would be sustainable. Beyond 5 would be even better, because you know you can't. By the time one funding cycle finishes, you're already looking where the next pot of money is going to come from, so it's never really enough. So I've just spoken about commissioning, long-term impact, and making sure that there's support there. Innovation and inclusion, and making sure that the communities, well, organisations, enterprises are resilient as well. And that's more about the people who are running the organisations, making sure that they've got the support, making sure that there's infrastructure support as well across cities. And, you know, where I can help with this is perhaps, you know, working with the national organisations to see you know, how we can make sure that places outside of London get a little bit more support. Because what I've noticed very much since becoming an MP is how many things I'm invited to in London or even down south, and there just seems to be a push for more support and funding for infrastructure down there, not as much up north. And you know, these are some of the conversations that I'm having.